Welcome to the Vandy Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Lee. Our guest today, Mitch Light. He is an executive editor at Athlon. He is also the sideline reporter for Vanderbilt football. Our show presented by the Well Coffee House, which is a Nashville area coffee house that provides fresh roasted coffee, along with its house-made pastries, breakfast, and lunch offerings. There are 4 locations to serve you in the Nashville area: Brentwood, Green Hills, downtown, and Bellevue. More information can be found at wellcoffeehouse.org. The Well Coffee House, where coffee changes lives. We also thank our co-sponsor, Wellspire, Nashville's Learning and Development Center, which is located in the Gulch. Our news presented by Sutherland and Belk, a family-owned injury law firm. If you or someone you know has been hurt in any type of accident, call Taylor or Russell at 615-846-6200. They can tell you your rights and if they can help. The Vanderbilt women beat Evansville 4-0 in soccer, the defending SEC champions, now 2-0 on the season. Today's guest line, presented by Boll & Branch, started by Vanderbilt graduates Scott and Missy Tannen. I've slept on Boll & Branch sheets for years. They are amazing. They are also fair trade certified. That means they're made under safe conditions by men and women who are treated and paid fairly. Try them for a month. You can return them for free, but you will not want to. Once you get the sheets, get the mattress. That was voted the best mattress of 2018. Go to bollandbranch.com. That is spelled B-O-L-L. Enter the promo code Vandy to get $50 off your first set of sheets. Mitch Light joins us now. Mitch, we appreciate you coming on the program on a Monday morning. Thank God football season is almost here. I hope you were doing well.
I'm doing well. Enjoyed watching some football over the weekend. Some, 2 games were on, begins in earnest this weekend. I always say, Chris, that Labor Day weekend's maybe my favorite sports weekend of the year because you got games on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. Although one of the games, if it's Monday night's game, Louisville hosting Notre Dame will not be a good game. Usually that's a marquee matchup, but Louisville is not going to be good. But still, a lot of football this weekend.
We were doing a fantasy football draft, and we had the Miami-Florida game on TV, and I'm not exaggerating. I was locked in on the draft, but every time I looked up in that game, something just crazy was happening. Every single time.
It wasn't, I don't know if it was because we haven't seen football in a while. I don't think that was it. I can't remember a game that had more like huge momentum-changing plays, like just fumbles near the goal line, bad interceptions, fake punt that was successful, fake field goal that was successful, but there was a holding penalty, but then there was a late hit that made it the first down. It wasn't a well-played game, but it was an eventful game.
Yeah, it was almost like the Vanderbilt-Baylor game in terms of the drama and the back and forth. It just was done in a completely different way.
Yeah, the Vanderbilt-Baylor game was well played. I mean, not defensively, but there was huge plays being made by the offenses. This game, and I've done a little, actually before we started this, I was doing a little research for my Cover 2 podcast I do here at Athlon Sports. And, the thing about it was neither team sustained anything. There was some big plays, but it wasn't like, I could look up. I'm guessing that neither team had a drive where they strung together more than 3 or 4 first downs, maybe one time each. But, so, to be expected in the first game of the season, and Florida, got the win, and they looked okay. They looked good defensively, but they look like they got a ways to go offensively.
Well, I want to ask you what you learned from that game about Florida, with the caveat, with several. First of all, it was in Orlando. It was a week earlier than normal, so it was extremely hot and humid, I'm sure. It was also a week earlier than teams are used to playing, which a first game is usually kind of sloppy, and then that make it a week earlier, although I do think they get to adjust probably some time for practice. But I think those are factors. A lot of times you see opening games that are not reflective of what a team is. But with those circumstances, did you learn anything about Florida?
Not really. And I, try not to overreact to week 1 when there's tons of games. In week 0, when there's only one game, I think it's a big danger not to overreact. I mean, like I said, the offense, and here's more specific, Florida had 2 plays over 60 yards, no other plays more than 20, and only one more than 15. So it's not like they were moving the ball consistently, but both defenses are very good. Florida's offensive line is a work in progress. And one thing about Florida's offensive line, it's not like they are plugging in 4 and 5 stars. I looked this up. That was not a position they've recruited very well. Their offensive line, they've got one kid who was a 4-star, transferred from Texas, was ranked in the top 200 nationally. Other than that, all their offensive linemen are ranked like 700 or 600 nationally or worse when they came in. And I get it, recruiting rankings aren't everything, but it's not a star-studded Florida offensive line. Franks made a horrible mistake. He was okay. I think, I don't want to overreact there. So it's kind of what we expected. Very, very good defense and an offense that has some playmakers that they got to figure out how to get the ball to.
Mitch, let's talk Vanderbilt. It is opening week. I know you get to see practices. It is very sensitive around there, and they don't want a lot of stuff leaking out. But are there any observations that you can share with us maybe in the last couple weeks that are interesting or maybe change the way that you think about this team at all?
Not really changed the way that I think. I mean, it's been my message through camp, or my opinion through camp is that I've been really impressed by the wide receiving core, that if they can protect the quarterback and get the ball out, I think there's some playmakers out there. And, I keep talking about Justice Shelton Mosley as a guy that's was brought in, very accomplished as a returner. I think we will see him on offense some. I think he's a good player there. You've talked a lot about Chris Pierce, a guy that I think we all kind of just not dismissed. That's a harsh word, but just thought he maybe got passed on the depth chart. He's looked good. I've always been a big Cam Johnson fan, C.J. Bowler there. So I think there's no shortage of weapons there. Then you got obviously Keyshawn Vaughn. I'd be interested to see what Jerry Godowski does with him to try and get the ball him, not just in the backfield, but in the passing game as well too. So no big secrets about this team. Very good wide receivers, a great running back, and an offensive line that's got to prove itself. And a quarterback that we think, my take on the quarterback, Chris, is they just need to get solid quarterback play. It can't be a weakness. And I think either one of those guys can do that if they've got time. But if this is the year where the offensive line on paper at this point has the most questions, I guess it's better that either Riley Neal or Deuce Wallace is the quarterback and not Kyle Shermer as far as, with the mobility. Though I will say, even though the offensive line might not have been a strength the last couple of years, they did a good job protecting Kyle Shermer as far as sacks and stuff. Maybe it's because Kyle was a veteran, knew how to get rid of the ball, but he did not get sacked a lot. And defensively, I think, Derek Mason said it all along, and I'm intrigued to see if it comes to fruition, but he thinks that the increased bodies and increased size of those bodies in the defensive line will make a big impact, because that was the issue last year. Had trouble stopping the run and got put in positions where they're second and short and third and short, and that's very difficult for the defense. And, I think the secondary probably has more overall SEC caliber players, but that's a trade-off. You lose, Jawan Williams, an All-American caliber player. So you lose the 1 star, and Ladarius Wiley was also a very good player. So maybe more depth in the secondary, but lacking the star there. So long-winded answer, nothing recently has changed my opinion. My opinion's been the same in this team basically throughout camp.
Yeah, I want to circle back to some storylines that maybe over the course of the preseason podcast, not necessarily just with you, but with all the guests that I have, that maybe we've not talked about enough. I want to circle back to defense, to the defensive line, because that's one that I had on my list before you mentioned it. The other one I think is quarterback depth. And here's what I mean by that. Last year, I think a lot of the way that they ran their offense may have been structured around, oh man, we really can't afford to lose Kyle. And he's not very mobile, so we've got to be extra careful not to lose him, I guess, with pass blocking. And it may have been a reason why Blasingame got more snaps over Vaughn at some points. I know that was a concern. I don't know exactly how it manifested in how they called the offense, but I'm sure it did. This year, I think that they feel, let's say that Neal starts and Deuce is the backup. I guess you could go the other way, but I have a feeling that Riley Neal is going to be the starter when they open the game. But let's say something happens to Neal. I think they feel very confident with Deuce Wallace, and behind him they have a number 3 in Mo Hassan, who has taken some snaps. It's not ideal, but it's a very different situation than it was opening day a year ago where it was Kyle Shermer and he's not very mobile and we can't get him hurt, and God help us if something happens to him from there.
100% agree. I mean, well, first, Derek Mason told, when I interviewed him for my Athlon story, one of his things he said in the spring was, the quarterback depth that they just didn't have last year, and they're not going to come out and say specifically what you just said, that if Kyle got hurt that they were screwed. But that was, would have been a tough situation. Mo Hassan did a nice job when he was asked to come in. Didn't throw a pass. I don't think ran the ball some. But the combination of Kyle's lack of mobility and the fact that they had to keep him healthy, I'm sure changed the way that they called the game at some point. So yeah, that's the good thing about having this quarterback battle. The old cliche, if you got two, you don't have one. That's not the case here, because I think both these guys are probably pretty even. It's going to be a tough decision. But if for one reason the starter's struggling, they can go to the backup, or the starter gets hurt, they can go to the backup. So I'll be interested to know if the starter stays healthy, if both play on Saturday. I don't know. My guess is actually I don't even know. What's your opinion? If they go in with one as a starter, do you think they go in with the idea that they want to see both guys in live action?
I don't think they do unless somebody is banged up or ineffective, and this is why Derek has had his quarterback carousels in the past. They have brought him resounding criticism. The last time he did that was a South Carolina game in the opener a couple years ago, and you remember how that went. Yeah,
but I think actually Adam Sparks had a good tweet this week. He made a joke. He's like, if I were a columnist, my column would be, Derek Mason, don't let previous QB issues or whatever his term was impact your decision going forward. Basically, if you want to do something that you think is best for the team, don't not do it because you're worried about people saying, oh, what happened in the South Carolina game? And I'm with you. Like, I don't like when staffs go in saying, okay, we're going to give someone 2 series and then we're going to switch, which I think was the case in the South Carolina game after Vanderbilt, scored 10 points to go up 10-0. I think within the flow of the game, if you want to give another guy a shot because you want to see him in live action, I think that's okay. But I definitely, if the offense is humming, there's no reason to switch. And I think this is going way back. But do you remember the Arkansas game when Robbie Caldwell's season, when they made the coordinator switch mid-season and they went down to Arkansas? And I don't know, I'm trying to who would have been the starter in 2010. But they switched. Vanderbilt actually scored on its first 2 possessions, and they switched quarterbacks for the 3rd possession, and it just blew up. And they didn't. I don't know if they scored again.
Was that a Larry Smith team?
Nah, it might have been, because Larry Smith was on the team obviously when Franklin took over. I don't know if Larry was the starter though. I mean, I could look it up, but Jared Funk was the backup, and I think they brought him in. And again, that offense was struggling mightily, and then it was shocking when they scored on their first 2 possessions, and then they switched quarterbacks. So that was a case where they were going in. They said we're going to go 2 series and then switch, similar to the South Carolina one. So I have no problem if they switched. I just wouldn't want to see them do it if the offense was playing well.
Yeah, I think we're on the same page here. I don't have an issue with quarterback switches. I think the media makes too much of them. I think they pin in a coach and say, well, he said he wasn't going to switch quarterbacks, but what if one guy's 4-8, 4 of 18 out of the gate? Then you're stupid if you don't switch. I think the thing to me is do it within the rhythm of the game. If a guy is struggling and you think the problem is at least significantly on the quarterback. Now, sometimes the quarterback doesn't have a chance because his line's not good, his receivers aren't getting open. But if the quarterback is culpable and he's not in a rhythm and you think the guy coming off the bench can give you a bigger boost, I'm all in favor of it. What I was not in favor of is what they did with Shermer a few years ago where they pulled Freeback and Kyle was getting in a rhythm. I think that's where we both come down.
Yeah, and when we'll move on, but I think they also brought Freeback in when they pinned deep in their own territory too, which doesn't make it easy for a quarterback.
No. The other thing is the defensive line, and I'm not going to say that's a world-beating defensive line because I don't think it is, but from what I have heard from people I've talked to who know what's going on, Odingbo is a really good player. I think he's their best defensive lineman. He's probably going to have a better season this year than any of the linemen had for them a year ago. I think that they think that Cam Tidd and Drew Birchmeyer are better players. Those guys have starting experience. I think the rotation behind them, I think they feel they've got 7, 8, 9 bodies, which is kind of what you need. Again, they're not world beaters, but I think it is an improvement over the situation that they've had. And the wild card to me is Malik Langham, who I think will certainly be a factor if he's eligible. And I don't know the answer to that question yet. I don't know if they know and are keeping it a secret or they don't know at all, but that's what I'm watching with that unit.
Yeah, I totally agree. More bodies, and I don't think they know on Langham yet. And there's with the NCAA the way it rules, you can't count on knowing. But yeah, so no, I totally agree. More bodies, you'd like to see a standout. I think Dayo Odingbo has the ability. Birchmeyer and Tidd have been just sort of guys that have been good enough to be in the rotation and start part-time starters throughout their basically career. You'd like to see one or both those kind of stand out this year, but they've got to do a better job at the point of attack.
I'm going to go ahead and jump into the mailbag, which is sponsored by Vanderbilt fan Josh Minton, an independent insurance agent operating out of Brentwood. If you're looking for a one-stop shop to take care of your insurance needs, Josh can take care of all those things. Call him today, 615-933-1979. Email him at josh@hqinsurance.com. Follow him on Twitter at Joshua Minton HQ or on Facebook at facebook.com/JD Minton HQ. He is my insurance agent. Give him a try. Tell him you heard about it here. Help those who help our show. Josh is a good guy, and you have nothing to lose. You can give Josh a call, tell him you heard about it on the podcast, and see if he can get you a better insurance plan. Vandy Doors 04 asks, Mitch, what is the biggest difference in Derek Mason you have seen in your time with the team from year one to now? What do you view as the trait that you think makes him think he can win consistently, and what worries you most about his success based on those same traits?
Interesting question there. I think he's just more confident. I think he's more sure of himself. I mean, I think he was a first-time head coach that came into a difficult situation. There's different ways you can interpret it, but when you come to Vanderbilt coming off 2 9-win seasons, it's a difficult situation in that the expectation has raised to basically in the modern era of Vanderbilt football to an all-time high. If he came in at any other time and has done what he, maybe did what he did initially, he would have been given so much more time. But I get it. The expectation should have been higher because of that previous success. But also it raised the bar so much. And then when they struggled so much the first year and he struggled with some parts of the job, I think that a lot of people formed their opinion of him. I think people have come around, a vast majority of Vanderbilt fans have come around, maybe vast majority is too big of a word there, but I think a lot of people have, that he is a good head coach. But Vanderbilt remains a difficult job. I think lately in the past year and a half, I think he's become so much more secure. I think, he speaks with more confidence about himself and his team. One thing about Derek, he's always had a ton of confidence in his team. Some of it you might look at it and say it was misguided, especially in that first season. But it's just about, I think they've proven as a staff that they're pretty solid in player development, finding guys, especially, at the skill positions, and they developed a really good quarterback in Kyle Shermer. It's about getting more of everything. He just needs more good players to make that jump from a program that's getting 6 wins and scratching and clawing to get to bowl game to get to that 7-8 win. Maybe some close games going your way that haven't gone your way, but big picture, just you need more good players.
This is my take on him. Is his biggest strength and weaknesses, and you can tell me whether you agree or disagree or put other things ahead of what I'm going to say. But I think that his biggest strength is that he's liked and that the players feel like he's got his back. And here's what I mean by that. I think if a season is going poorly and the players don't like playing for a coach and the experience is drudgery and they don't feel like the coach has their best interests in heart, those are the kinds of teams that lay down and quit. Instead, you've seen Derek's teams, when the season could have gone off the rails, get stronger. What you've also seen is you've seen that manifest in the transfer market. They don't lose kids for the most part that they don't want to lose, and they pick up a lot of kids. They have had a net positive in the transfer market since that's become a thing. I think that's how his personality plays out, and the fact that he's likable. I think those are the tangible places where it helps him and them. I think his biggest weakness, the biggest question that I still have about him is organization and staying on top of things. I think some people are naturally very organized. I don't know that that's Derek's gift. I'm not taking shots at him. I think that we all have things that we are better at than others. I don't know that that is on the top of his strengths. And that's kind of my question is that a thing, like you've seen it play out with clock management? How much better has he gotten there? That's a question that I have going into the year.
Yeah, I will say, just from being around the team, I don't strike them in any regard as being unorganized. I'm not defending them. I don't necessarily agree with. I think he's gotten more aggressive going for it on fourth down in recent years. I don't agree with every decision with clock management and punting and non-punting, but that's just my opinion, and that's going to be with any coach. So I don't see, at least game day lack of organization being an issue at all. And I think you bring up a couple of good points, being, well liked and well liked by everyone in the athletic department, in the university. He's just a really good guy. And, you don't see that a lot in this world of coaching. And some people might counter that and say, well, look, some of the most successful coaches aren't, the most well liked, but yeah, I'm convinced you can be a good coach and a good guy. So, we'll see, just how it unfolds early this season. But I think he's made a lot of strides as a head coach. I think the caliber of player that they're bringing is not drastically better than it was a few years ago, but I think it's steadily improving. So, we'll see what happens this year.
Yeah, let me clarify that a bit. I'm not saying that they're disorganized. I do think that there are some things with clock management and things like that that have hurt them at times. I guess my point is I have seen people like Tim Corbin, who is that to an extreme degree. You saw it with James Franklin. I'm just saying I don't see that as a gift of his to the degree of the people that are the very best at it.
Okay, that's fair.
Next question is for Mr. Vandy. What do you think, or who do you think should be the starting quarterback?
I haven't seen enough of practice to form an opinion. I thought the earlier practices I went to were both guys looked really good, and maybe some of the later ones that were more live action where the defense was doing its thing, putting more pressure on them. Maybe neither one stood out. My only, obviously they need to go with who they think the best quarterback is and gives them the best chance to win in the short term. I guess for program purposes, it would be kind of nice if Deuce Wallace won the job, so he'd have a 2-year starter. But that's not. I mean, that would only be in like a tiebreaker. Like the staff is sitting around and there's 6 offensive coaches and it's 3-3. I'd like to see Deuce Wallace get in there enough this year where you go into next year confident that he could be a good quarterback as a 5th-year senior. But I know it sounds as a cop-out. I went into the offseason thinking it was going to be 60-40 Neal, then went back to 50, maybe 51-49 Wallace, and there's some Wallace momentum there. I'd put it at 50-50 right now, and I honestly don't have a strong opinion. Just I want the better quarterback to win the job, or them to go with the better quarterback.
Dusty Orleans says, which position group will we learn the most about during the Georgia game?
We've talked a lot too, and Georgia's so good that they will expose some weaknesses. I think we'll learn more about all the position groups in week 2 against Purdue. I think kind of wide receiver maybe in a weird way, because I go back to something Andy Ludwig once told me about Elijah Lipscomb. Like after the Florida game, it was a low-scoring game where Vanderbilt lost, and I've told this story on the podcast before, where that's when they knew Lipscomb was really good because he got open against Florida's. Florida's had elite cornerbacks basically every season. And it's one thing getting open against average to below average SEC teams or non-conference teams. But when they saw that he was for real that game. So I think, any of the offensive performance, like especially the wide receivers, if those guys are getting open against Georgia's defense, I think that's a really good sign. If the defensive line can hold up to a degree against the rushing attack at Georgia, that's a good sign. I mean, I know both teams are completely different, but remember 3 years ago when Vanderbilt won down in Athens, that was the difference in the game. I thought Vanderbilt did a great job slowing down Georgia's rushing attack. Now, this is an elite Georgia offensive line, maybe the best in the country. So I think basically any unit that performs better than we expect, I think we're going to learn something about. I wouldn't overreact negatively, within reason, to any unit struggling, because Georgia's just really, really good across the board at almost every position.
Door King wants to know your biggest concerns about Georgia.
It's stopping the run. I think, with that offensive line and those running backs, Swift evidently has been banged up a little bit in preseason camp, but I think he was back to full speed last week. It's just football's very difficult when you can't stop the other team from running the ball. So that is my number one concern. First play of the game, 7 yards, second play, 5 yards, third play, 12 yards. That's just it's demoralizing for the defense, and it makes playing offense so much easier.
What is the percentage chance this game is close in the fourth quarter? Asks Vandy Nash.
I don't know a percentage chance, but I will say if you look back to the Georgia game last year, and that's what makes beating a really good team so difficult. The margin for error is so slim. Vanderbilt played very well at Georgia in the first half last year. Had 3 drives over 50 yards, had some defensive stops, but then you look up at halftime, it was 21-6. And, I think you'd even ask the Georgia coaches that Vanderbilt played them, other than the games they lost, like the LSU and Alabama, played them as well as most teams in the first half. They got down to the red zone, didn't convert, and gave up, I think, a big play at the end of the first half. So, I don't think this is I don't think this game gets out of hand in the first quarter. I think Vanderbilt will play well in the first half. You got to get some breaks. Fumbles got to go your way, a tip ball here or there, and you got to capitalize on every opportunity to hang with a team like Georgia.
Billy Ray Valentine asks, what is your best sense at what Vanderbilt will do with a football stadium facility within the next 5 years? Will that be renovate, build, lease, or do nothing?
Renovate would be my best guess. Gone from, speaking about percentages to, what percentage chance. I think my feeling is that there's a greater percentage of that happening. And this is basically, no inside information. You hear things from a lot of different sources, but I would say I believe they'll do something to the existing structure.
Yeah, I have felt that they would build an entirely new one. I think I'm in the minority there. It just seems like it's spinning the wheel of fortune, and what does it land on every day? And that's kind of been the history of this thing. It just seems like plans and things change all the time. I don't know if that's the case now, but historically, feeling confident about any direction they're going to go has been sort of a fool's errand.
Yeah, just don't know. Unless, there's some people obviously in the know, and I'm not one of them, so I'm just kind of speculating.
Mitch, anything else worth discussing regarding Vanderbilt football or any other sports that we didn't get around to today?
No, one thing we haven't talked about is the punting. It looks like I guess it's going to be Harrison Smith, and Vanderbilt got pretty good punting from Parker Tomei last year. That's assuming Vanderbilt has to punt. Maybe the offense is so good and there won't be any punting. But special teams, I think they need a big season from Riley Gay, who has got the leg, but has been inconsistent, really puzzling, with some short kicks. So for Vanderbilt to overachieve this year, we'll need to be really good on special teams. I'll be interested to see who they use in the return game. You go to practice, see a lot of different guys back there. So no, just looking forward to the first week, the excitement of the first week, and then I think we'll learn a lot more about this team even in week 2 when you go down to Purdue or go up to Purdue.
Mitch, what's on tap at Athlon? I know that folks can still get the college football issue. The college basketball issue will be hitting the newsstands in the coming weeks. And, of course, you are a person that people out there, I'm sure, would want to follow on Twitter. So tell us about all those things.
All right, you can follow me on Twitter at Athlon Mitch. Our college football magazines are still out. Our NFL mags are still out. If you have a fantasy draft, our mags are out. Our college basketball magazine will be out actually in 2 or 3 weeks. And then if you want like national college coverage, the Cover 2 podcast with me and Braden Gall, we do that twice a week on Monday and Wednesday.
Thanks a bunch, Mitch.
All right, talk to you soon, Chris.
He's Mitch Light of Athlon and the sideline announcer for Vanderbilt football. I'm Chris Lee, host of the Vandy Sports Podcast. Thank you for listening. We will drop several more episodes later in the week.